This is episode 44 of the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I'm Carly Kade, and today I'm speaking with Patrick Smithwick. Patrick has been working with horses all of his life. At the age of 15, he began riding for his father, A.P. Patrick Smithwick, the legendary Hall of Fame steeplechase jockey. He worked his way through college by exercising thoroughbreds and riding steeplechase races at major East Coast tracks and at hunt meets from South Carolina to New York State, and also in the Midwest. Patrick has won awards for the writing of newspaper features, short stories, and magazine pieces while working as a Chesapeake Bay waterman, newspaper reporter, and teacher of English, creative writing, and medieval history. He holds a BA and an MLA from Johns Hopkins University, an MA from Hollins College, where he met his wife, it was love at first sight, and an EFM from the University of the South. Patrick lives with his wife Ansley on the 10-acre farm where he was raised in Moncton, Maryland. He writes every morning in the refurbished milking parlor of his barn, looking out at his two thoroughbreds and one very intelligent miniature donkey, who at feed time pushes his nose against the window of the writing room while stamping his feet. Most afternoons, Patrick hops on retired steeplechaser Ryder Wood and goes for a cross-country ride. Patrick is the author of the award-winning racing trilogy, including Racing My Father, Flying Change, and Racing Time. Now, let's get into the interview. Welcome to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast, a podcast featuring interviews with equestrian authors who love all things horses and writing about them. In each episode, you'll hear inspirational stories from horsebook authors, including writing advice and marketing tips to help you write your very own horsebook. If you're an author, aspire to be an author, or simply love horsebooks, then you are in the right place. I'm your host, Carly Kade, and creative writing makes my spurs jingle. Hi everyone, welcome to the Equestrian Author Spotlight show. Today it is my honor to have Patrick Smithwick with me today. Hi Patrick.
Hi Carly, how you doing?
I'm great, and I am so excited to make your acquaintance. Our good mutual friend and fellow author, Lori Bergley, introduced us to each other, and I know that you spend a little bit of time with her there in Maryland. You're a local celebrity, and she's so excited for this interview.
Hopefully she's going to come over when the weather gets good and go for a ride with me soon.
Oh, so jealous of that. That is, and Maryland is beautiful. I actually was there for an American Horse Publications conference 2 years ago, and we got to see the cross-country courses and just how beautiful Maryland is, and I'm so excited to talk to you about your local farm and more about Maryland. So how I love to start these interviews off is understanding how authors have gotten into horses, how their love affair with horses began, and you have quite a history with horses. Can you tell us a little bit about your background with horses?
Sure. I think of when you said that, I think of an image of myself when I was about a year old or maybe 9 months, and I'm up on this famous horse called Niji. He was a great steeplechase horse, and so my father rode Niji. He was a champion steeplechase horse 3 years in a row in the 50s, and my father was a steeplechase jockey. And my mother was a really good rider, rode in the show ring and fox hunted and trained ponies and horses. So when I was growing up, I had a great opportunity. I rode a lot of ponies. Mom sort of had a pony business going, and we'd get these young ponies and we'd make them, and I'd turn them either into fox hunters or show horses or quiet horses hopefully we'd quiet them down for people to ride. And she also taught riding, but mainly people would come over and we'd just tack up all the ponies, and 5 or 6, 7 of us, and we'd go cross-country riding all around here, about 2,000 open acres, and just have the best time stopping and seeing people. Mom see all her friends, and you learned how to ride, because if you didn't, you wouldn't stay on the pony. And then I sort of transitioned from, I also had a really good show pony. I had a really good fox hunter called Queenie. I'll start choking up talking about her, and I just loved her. She was a dark bay, medium size, and could jump anything. And
Mm.
many a time I went into a fence and wasn't sure if I wanted to jump it, and Queenie would jump it. She was quiet. Then I had a really flashy black show pony called Twinkle, and she just would get the ribbons as soon as she walked in the ring. And it really taught me how to ride because she was a little rank. She had an Arabian head and was kind of nervous, and she'd go in the ring and she would be right on the edge the whole time, just wanted to go faster and faster. And about that time, when I was about 15, I transitioned into riding horses, and I started riding at the racetrack with my father, galloping race horses at major tracks up and down the East Coast, and a lot at Pimlico and Delaware Park and Belmont Park. And there's a lot about Saratoga in my 3 books, the most beautiful track in America, and perhaps the most successful. And I used to ride my ponies all around the tracks at Saratoga when I was a kid. That was really fun.
Oh, I can imagine.
And then when I was 15 or so, I started riding race horses. And by the time I was 17, I started riding races.
Wow. And we should mention that your father is the legendary steeplechase jockey, A.P. Smithwick. So
Right.
you have horses in your blood, and you are lucky to grow up with them. Both your mother and your father loved horses, and racing on the Saratoga track as a young person. Like, I can't. What feelings did you have having that experience?
I had this great friend, and I write about it. And I just loved him. His name was Mike White, and he had a pony too. And when we were about 14 or so, we would get in so much trouble because here all these trainers are training these, $100,000 horses and getting ready for the races. And we'd tack up our ponies and we'd go out on the track and race all around. And then we'd go in the infield and jump fences. And people would be saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" But we just had the best time. And everyone, the racetrack then was sort of like a big club. Everybody knew everybody, and we're all in it together. And they would all laugh, and sometimes I'd go with the pony with the racehorses on a big pony to help take care of the racehorses. And then about the next year when I turned 15, then I started actually getting on the horses.
Mm.
But and then that was down to work because then my father started training. He had a lot of really rank, difficult to train horses. He was known as being a specialist for that. And we get these horses that basically no one could even get out of the barn or tack up or get on, and they were pretty rough sometimes. And then that's how I really learned how to ride, was riding those horses.
I can only imagine. I mean, I'm sure it taught you a lot about life in general, having to work with difficult horses and finding ways to manage them, which
Yeah.
which we're going to get into here deeper as we talk about your books, about these experiences that enriched your life. But first, I want to talk a little bit. We opened with Maryland and your history with horses. You currently still have horses, and you actually live on the horse farm where you were raised in Moncton, Maryland. So will you tell us about living on your farm and your herd, and a little bit about your family, and then we'll get into the good stuff and talk about your books?
Sure. When my mother died in 2012, and then I took over the farm from my 2 sisters. And when I first came here, I had a contract for a book. It was a pretty good contract, a history of a hospital. And there was nowhere to work in the house because everything was under construction. And I kept on going in the house and trying to find a desk and a place where I could write. And my daughter was about 8 at the time. And she said, "Dad, you like it so much out in the barn. Why don't you just work out in the barn?" So this, where I am right now, this was an old milking parlor. And it was just, then when I was a kid, it was just a shed for horses and ponies would come in and out. And so I refurbished this room and started working right here. And it's so much fun. I'm in the barn, which was one of my favorite places of my life when I was a child. And above me is the huge hayloft. The barn was built in the pre-Civil War times. And up in the hayloft, there was this secret room I had, and we turned it into the Cuckoo Lily Club. Mm-hmm. And that was my first book, really. I wrote a rules book. I was the self-proclaimed president of the Cuckoo Lily Club, of course. And I'd been reading, I can look at the tree right now, right outside the window, where I built a huge tree house. I loved building tree houses. And I'd pull the rope ladder up, and I read Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain, one of my biggest influences out there. And I can remember it so well. And then we started the Ukulele Club, and I had all my best friends were in it, and we had a rules book which was about 10, 15 pages long that included all the initiation rites that you had to perform. You had to swim around our pond, which is only about a mile away. You had to swim around a little island with no clothes on, skinny dip, and it was for boys, and it was filled with snapping turtles. So that took some nerve. Anyway, so I love working here. And then when I came back here in 2012, really is when I finished off one of my books, and I found diaries of my mother's and my father's, and I felt so grounded being here on this soil where I can just walk around the farm and I know every square inch. Here's where I rode this horse. Here's where the pony jumped the stream. So I love being here. And my father also had race horses here when he was training. He had about 10 horses just in light work here. And then we'd have the horses in really racing and in strong work at a racetrack like Delaware Park, Pimlico, Belmont Park, Saratoga. And then also, when I was a kid, my mother had a lot of ponies here and some show horses. So it has a lot of memories. And I had two sisters. They grew up riding. They didn't like it quite as much as I did. Well, when I was a teenager, then I started doing everything with my father, going to work with him, going everywhere with him. It was kind of like a 18th century upbringing that people don't have now, where you can go to work with your father and you meet all his friends. And his friends were these incredible people. Quite a few of them, about half a dozen of them, all ended up in the Hall of Fame. There I was, a little boy, listening to their stories. And so I think that's where I got the love of storytelling in a lot of ways. Two sons and my daughter are grown up. So I live here with my wife, and I have two horses out there. I have a retired steeplechase horse, Riderwood, who was the quietest horse I've ever had in my life, and he's just a wonderful horse to ride. He's shedding right now. And then I have another horse that was given to me by a great friend, J.B. Secor, whose nickname was the Lear Jet. And he was a really, really fast horse on the racetrack. He ran in 75 races and won 50 of them. Almost like a quarter horse. He loved going 5/8 of a mile, maybe 3/4, but he's really fast. So I'm still teaching him how to quiet down, because all he knows how to do is gallop fast or walk.
Which is kind of what they're trained to do, right?
And actually, the beginning of my book, Racing Time, that just came out, and we launched that at Saratoga the day of my father's memorial race. It was a very emotional day. There was a $150,000 memorial race in honor of my father at the beginning of the Saratoga meet, which is at the early August. And right after the race, we all walked over to the Saratoga Racing Hall of Fame, and I launched the book that day and gave a talk and a reading, and it was a lot of fun. But I was also going to say, I'm looking out the window at the prologue of the book in a way, and I'm looking at the stream, because the book starts with an allusion to the myth of Sisyphus, and I have to dig up the stream every spring by hand, and that's the beginning of the book. And so a lot of that book, is about working on the farm and what place means.
And I love that. Thank you for sharing some. I'm envious of your writing barn. It sounds like the most perfect place to write. But also, your books are memoir. What a perfect way to be able to reflect on your life, and right from the place where so much of it happened and circulated. So, I really feel like this is a perfect opening. You've already mentioned a little bit about your most recent book, Racing Time. Would you talk to us a little bit and walk us through the three books, and maybe hold up the covers, the beautiful covers, while you talk about them?
These are my father's spurs. And people are listening. Carly talks about jingling her spurs, and I have some spurs that steeplechase jockeys used to use, and they just have little dimes in them. They don't have, the rowels are made of dimes. And these are my father's, and I used them myself. They're very special to me. This is the first book that I wrote in the memoir, Racing My Father. And it's all about growing up with my father. I won my first race right there, and that's my father. I still ride in that tack, in that saddle, and I wore that helmet yesterday when I was riding. It is getting a little old. And then I still have that belt that he's wearing, and I use these binoculars of my father's. But as I tell you, this is kind of a fun picture, because I was only about 17 years old, and I rode this horse who was pulled really hard. And we were going in the timber race, it was about 3 miles, and it was a very, very fast race, riding against professionals. I was only 17. And so from the, I sent you a photograph of him. The third fence from home, I let him loose, and he started going at the second fence from home. After the horses jumped the fence, my father got so excited watching the race that he ran out on the course and jumped the last 2 fences on foot and ripped his pants. You can see right here. So this book brings back great memories, and it's about being brought up in a very different kind of lifestyle. The racetrack was pretty wild back then, and it was a hard drinking kind of place. It was a men's kind of club. You know, after the races, you'd go sit in the pub and have a cold beer, or after work in the morning. And everybody loved my father. He just something very special about him. So I had a lot of fun with that, with writing that book, that memoir. And then I wrote this book, which is called Flying Change, which is based on a poem by Henry Taylor, the Pulitzer Prize winning poet. That's a fence at the Maryland Hunt Cup right there. That actually is me sitting on it. And I had a photographer take that to my neighbor, who's a professional photographer, and we thought, well, hell, we might as well use that. We decided with this book, I decided at about the age of 50, my father died at a young age of 47. For some reason, I turned 47, and I thought, oh, I had a job, I had a wife and 3 kids, everything was going along very well. I thought, so I'm getting a little flat here. Why not start riding races again? Great idea. So I lost 10 pounds, had to get really fit, started riding every single day before work. I had a tough job then as a director of publications of a school. My best friend, Tom Voss, had some really good horses, and I started riding his horses. And in this book, I end up riding in the toughest steeplechase race in the country, maybe the world, the Maryland Hunt Cup, on that horse called Florida Law. So the first book is about being a son and looking at my father, and actually a lot about my mother. And then this book, Flying Change, is about trying to do all this and being the father, and also directing my attention to my own 3 children, Eliza, Patty, and Andrew. So this one won an award, the Dr. Tony Ryan Literary Award. Most recently, I wrote this book, Racing Time. And looking at the cover, I worked very closely I met this incredible artist, Sam Robinson, and I started coming up with this idea of having paintings, illustrations. At first, I wanted to do sketches. And then I sent him the manuscript, and I said, can you think of some good images? And we started working on it, and it evolved into oil paintings. They're about 2 feet by about 2.5 feet by 2 feet. This is a really big oil painting now that we have above our fireplace. Illustration. Each illustration coincides or is in a section of the book directly across from where the action takes place. But this book was very difficult to write because you can see it's Racing Time, a memoir of love, loss, and liberation. It was sparked by the death of my best friend, Tom Voss, who I grew up with. He's in both the other books. He was like a brother to me, and my father was very much like a father to him when he grew up, and he learned much of his horsemanship from my father. I was hit that year in 2014 with a couple of other friends left us. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. It was a very difficult straitjacket to be in to try to write about all this, because in some ways you're writing about a subject, death, that people don't want to hear about. And so I had to work really hard on it to make it something that people would want to read. And it's actually a sort of a love story about my love and camaraderie with Tom. Speedy Cannell, who is part African-American, part Cherokee, and he was an incredible horse whisperer type guy. He was also an unbelievable singer. He warmed up for Marvin Gaye, and Marvin Gaye couldn't stand him because the people would applaud so much and didn't want him to leave the stage. And he was also a boxer. And so when I grew up, he was like, Speedy was an idol of mine. He had the style of Sugar Ray Leonard in the boxing ring. And then the third man is Dickie Small. He was an incredible trainer of flat horses. He was a Vietnam veteran, was a Green Beret, and a very influential character in my life. So, and Racing Time has a double meaning. Each of my titles has a double meaning. Racing My Father is about sort of racing with my father, but then also racing against my father, right? Like for quite a while, I was judging myself and racing against him. Here, he was in the Hall of Fame. He had this incredible success when he was, 24 years old. He was one of the best riders in the world. And then Flying Change is about, well, you know what a flying change is, when a horse does a flying change, and that's what the Henry Taylor's poem is about. And it's about making this flying change in my life, all of a sudden doing a flying change and going back into racing. But then in the end, I do a flying change and sort of duck back out of it. A lot of people miss that one. I do these figure eights with my daughter, Eliza, and I try to push that image at the end of the book. And we're doing flying changes in the figure eights, pretending we're riding ponies, skipping. I kind of decided that I wanted to devote my attention more to my kids and my family and not get totally immersed in being a jockey again. Racing Time is about racing. It is racing time now. Let's go. It's time to get going. And it's also about us baby boomers. We are a racing time. It also has 2 chapters I really like, where in the book I happen at the same time to lose a horse I really loved. And he died actually right outside the office, just in the field about 4 feet from here, with his head in my lap. Great illustration of it. It's one of my favorite ones. He was perfectly healthy until that one day. That was it. His name was Warfield. And that book is, I'm pushing that and I'm marketing that, and it's doing fairly well.
And I wanted to say thank you too. Your publisher was so generous to send me a copy.
Oh, good.
So I'm excited to have it. It's a beautiful book, and you're correct. The paintings are gorgeous, and your writing is just stellar. You write from a very, very personal place about your life and your experiences with horses, and you've had a very obviously interesting life. Definitely something that many people don't have the opportunity to experience. Why did you decide to go into memoir?
When I was at Johns Hopkins, I used to get up at 5:30 in the morning, go to Pimlico, gallop horses for 3 hours, and then I go to Hopkins, and I graduated from Hopkins. I thought, this is it. I'm leaving the world of horses. I spent all my life thinking I'm leaving, and I do it for about 2 minutes and come back. And I wanted to go into newspaper work. That was at the height of the Watergate era kind of thing. Journalism was really big. Woodward and Bernstein. The newspapers were very powerful. The Sunday paper weighed about 5 pounds. And I did. I went to work for some small newspapers, and I just had a ball. But while I was working at the newspapers, the first one I worked for, the editor left after about 2 months, and I was about 2 months out of college, and I became the editor. And I was only 21 years old, and it was pretty wild. Anyway, but at that time, on my own, I was writing some fiction, some short stories that usually had to do with the horse world, what was closest to my heart, really. My journalism was about everything that you write about in journalism. Also, I focused quite a bit on the Chesapeake Bay and on the Waterman. So then I was doing the journalism, and I started writing some pieces, short stories that were very autobiographical. And the first one I wrote was, actually, I was at Hopkins, and my father had a really bad fall in a hurdle race and had to stop riding, and it was a blow to our family. And I wrote it as kind of a love story to him, as a wonderful memory of, because I was with him the last day he had to fall. And it's all about getting up and going to work with him and doing all the little things and going to the races. What he used to have to do to lose weight to go to the races, he was way too big to be a jockey. He would put on thermal insulated underwear, then he put on a sweatsuit, then he put on corduroys and a wool and turtleneck and a wool sweater and a parka and a wool hat, get in the car, usually a Ford, turn the heat up and drive 80 miles an hour to the races and lose 5 pounds on the way to the races.
Oh my goodness.
I had to do that quite a few times. And usually when he was doing it, he would sip on a thermos of screwdrivers on the way, which we won't tell our younger viewers what they are. It has something to make them a little spicier. So I wrote that piece, and I was inspired by a piece by Ernest Hemingway called My Old Man. One night I read this short story by Hemingway, and it was about a boy whose father was a steeplechase jockey. I thought, what the heck? Hemingway, he didn't know anything about horses or steeplechasing. I got up the next morning and I wrote mine. Anyway, I sent it to a horse publication, and I couldn't believe it. About 3 days later, the editor called me up all excited at night, accepted it, and said he was going to publish it in the August issue. which is when Saratoga is, which is the biggest time to be published in horse racing, I thought, well, this is looking pretty good, this writing business. I didn't know that it wasn't all going to be like that from then on. So then I'm in and out of journalism, and I went into teaching. And as I went into teaching, and I went to Hollins University, and at Hollins University, their graduate program, I was writing short stories, and they encouraged me to write a novel. And I did write short stories for about 5 or 10 years, and I would send them out to all the magazines with the SASE, self-addressed stamped envelope, hoping they never send it back. And they're very autobiographical. Then after a while, I started thinking, I don't really need to fictionalize my life. And I started reading the Memoir, and I read Growing Up by Russell Baker, West with the Night by Burl Markham, many other memoirs that I really enjoyed, some Montaigne's pieces. And I started becoming very interested in the memoir and what you could do with it. Then that got me going and writing the first one, which is Racing My Father. I think the memoir is very interesting, and sometimes I get so frustrated, and I think, oh, God, I wish this was fiction, because the memoir puts you in this incredible straitjacket. You have this great story to tell, but then in real life, such and such happens here, and it's like, well, that's no good. That's not what I want. And then you have to kind of write around it, but it puts you in a form that you have to use, because you have to rely on what really happened. And I think you can tell a lot about life by writing about yourself, which but actually writing about yourself. You can be the protagonist or the narrator, but you could be writing about everybody else, which in racing time is what I try to do.
Mm-hmm. And you write it in such a way that it reads as if it could be fiction. It reads like a novel, like a story.
That's a good point. That's why I wish I'd mentioned that, and I'm glad you did. You're sharp, Carly.
Thanks, I try.
That's how I think of them. Because I taught literature for so long, and I also taught it to adults, and I've taught at the university level, and high school students that are going on to Harvard and Princeton and Johns Hopkins. And I've taught. That's how I've learned so much of the literature that I know. And so I use all the techniques a novelist uses. So I consider my memoirs nonfiction novels. And I kind of structure them that way, take the real events and try to turn it into something very similar to a novel.
Mm-hmm. And it certainly reads like that. And so all your experience, all your background, I'm sure helps develop that. I mean, you're a teacher, you've written for newspapers, you're an editor, and then you have this rich history with horses. It's just magical. It's a magical combination.
Yeah, I never knew that it would work out that way, but it does come together pretty well. In this book, Flying Change, you bring up the subject because you could also be a Freudian psychologist. This book is a lot about integrating my interests and saying I can write, I can ride. I don't have to always do one or the other. I think in my education, when I was brought up in high school, it made it seem like you just did this one thing. Mm-hmm. So the book is a lot about bringing my different interests together.
I love that. I mean, you created your space in the world rather than, fitting yourself into a slot. You said, this is who I'm going to be. And you embraced it and you wrote about it and you made it. That's so beautiful.
The ride has been a little bit wild, but thank you very much.
Well, I think that's the thing, though, too, about creating your own place in the world is it can get a little messy, but aren't you more happy living in this space rather than doing something that you think you're supposed to be doing, but just that one thing? Aren't you much more happy having this breadth of experience and having created something that is 100% your own?
Yes, I definitely am.
I love that your memoir reads as if it were a nonfiction novel, like you said. So living on the farm where you grew up and a lot of these memories happen, I'm sure helps you write. Are there any other ways that you capture moments in time to put into your memoir? I'm sure your style has kind of changed from the first one to the third one. And we always grow stronger as we write our books. Do you journal? Do you take notes? How do you kind of capture moments that you want to put into your memoir?
Actually, remember I talked about this first when I was in college. I published 2 short stories, one about my father and another one called The Old Horseman, about a groom that I just loved. And it's a very intense piece about him, Emmett Grayson. Oh, and then I published another short story. I forgot about this that I loved, called A Leg Up. And it's about when my father was in his late 40s, and then he got cancer, and he was weak, and he was ill. And he also, from the fall, lost about 20% of his use of his left side. And we had this wild, crazy horse called Totem Home, and no one could school him. And one day, this young rider got on him, and then he fell off, and he couldn't get him to jump, and the rider fell off and hit the horse across the face with the whip. Well, that was the last straw. My father ran over and grabbed the jockey and threw him away from the horse. And then I thought he was going to give me a leg up on the horse. And then he got up on the horse himself.
Oh, wow.
Jumped the horse over the 3 hurdles better than anyone on the farm had done. And it was just this beautiful, very emotional experience. And that also found its way into the book. So you can see those were pieces I've been working on, and I didn't know that they would become a book one day. In Flying Change, when I was in training to ride and thinking about riding and losing weight and getting fit and wondering, there's always this self-doubt. Could I do it? Do I really want to do it? I'm putting myself in a little bit of danger here. I did get up early in the morning, and I kept a racing journal about a lot of it. And I didn't know that if I would use it or how I would use it or what would become of it, but I just wanted to get it down on paper. Racing Time, there's one long section in there that I wanted to have published as magazine piece, a section on Pimlico, but I never got around to sending it to the magazines because it was 80 pages long. Actually, part of the book is I had to give the 3 eulogies to the 3 people, the 3 men in that one year. So I used those, and then when my horse Warfield died suddenly in the field, I just had to write about that. That's a good example. I knew I wanted to write what was in my emotions and what I felt. And I wanted to, in that piece, I wanted to try to get inside a horse's head. And how did he know me, or did he know me? And what do horses feel for a human? What do they know? What do they feel? And I try to do that. And when those kind of things come up, I just throw everything aside, and the guests can be here, people can be visiting or whatever, and I just come out and do it. First draft, fast, get it done. Throughout Racing Time, that year, I did write quite a bit in my journal, sort of just to keep myself sane. And I wrote my best friend Tom, after he died, letters. I wrote him about 50 letters probably. And I'd be in here just having a ball, writing him a letter. And then I'd get kind of serious. And how about this? And why didn't we do that? I wish we'd done this. What do you think about this? And it was this surreal, almost hallucinogenic experience, but I just kept rolling with it because it seemed like that's what I needed to do.
Yeah.
And then I used some of those in the book. I'm always writing, and I do like to write in journals. And before, in my earlier years, I can look across the office here, and I have a whole trunk of journals that I kept, pages and pages, when I was teaching and doing other things.
That's beautiful. I mean, and what I'm hearing in there a little bit is that you kind of follow the muse. Like when something spurs up for you, you kind of follow where it wants to take you, and you don't put any limitations on it. Like the letters to your friend that had passed, and you're like, this is what is calling me forward, so I'm just going to kind of go with it. Is that sort of what's going on there?
That's a good point. And I definitely didn't tell anybody because they said, Patrick, maybe you need to go talk to somebody. But I didn't tell anyone. I just came in and did it. And I communicated with Tom, and I felt like I was communicating with him, and I was communicating with him. And I think that's exactly right. I'm working on a book now that's where I'm doing that with Racing Time in particular. When different things happened, would get it on paper early the next morning. At the time, I was working as a middle school teacher, so which I loved, and I've taught all kinds of grades. But I think middle schoolers should run the world. They're the healthiest, the strongest, the bravest, the most independent, and they absolutely have more energy than any other age group in the world. So I was teaching them, and even though I was going through these tough times, as soon as I got to school, guess what? You had to wake up and get on that horse and ride. So, but I'd come out here in the morning, and for about an hour before I go in there, I just sort of sit down and just write. And it wasn't necessarily organized, but just get it on the page.
Hmm. And that's very actually healing too for people to go through that when they're experiencing something difficult, to kind of process, to just get that emotion out and put it on the page. So I don't think you needed any counseling there. I think you were actually counseling yourself and working your way through that, and then you were able to process all that emotion. But then it became like a gift in a book that you are sharing with your readers too. So I think that's a beautiful way to do it.
I have to mention that then it was interesting structuring the book, because you can't just start off
Mm.
uh, with some the really tough stuff. You can, but I wanted the reader to keep reading. So there are a lot of the book is a celebration of the relationships, and it also had a lot of fun remembering the really great times, and I put those on the page. I really celebrated each of the individuals and mainly two horses, and the best times I had with them, and so it's very much a toast to them, and the great times we had. And there's a lot of fun and it's some humor. Also, it worked out well being a middle school teacher, because I included some of that, and you can't help but get that energy and the fun and the zest for life that the middle schoolers have.
And that's a great point that you make there. Like, you know, when you are writing memoir, it's your own story, but then you also have to be thoughtful for your reader, right? And how you put your book together, because you want it to tell that story, but you also want it to be is set up in a way that makes them want to read forward. So that's actually very smart thinking, right? Because it's your life, of you, about you, but it's for your readers. So that's really smart to think of it that way.
That's when I learned for other writers on each of these books. At first, I was sort of doing them chronologically, but one of my favorite kind of chapters would be the third or fourth one in. Then finally, I decided with each of them, I thought, there's no reason I can't just take this chapter with flying change, take this chapter and put it right in the beginning. And I can use that at the beginning. The reader can read that, and then we can drop back and start later. And so you can still shift time around so that it's the reader wants to keep going, and so it all comes together in one artistic whole.
Mm-hmm. So you have some freedom. It doesn't have to be set up chronologically. You can move things around, and you can still engage the reader, and then you can you can do it how you want, right? You have the opportunity to do that.
That was a huge load off my back when I figured that out. It doesn't seem like it would be that difficult to come up with that concept, but then I did, and I thought, great, now I can start it where I want to start it.
And that's great.
I got to talk about the book designer, Jerry Valerio. I wrote The History of Gilman School, a book I'm extremely proud of, and I worked with the great historian Walter Lord on that book. And I met Jerry Valerio, who is a book designer, has designed over 500 books. So on my latest book, the publisher had a book designer, and they showed me what they're going to do. And I thought, oh my, I don't like this too much. And I called up Jerry, and I pretty much got him out of retirement. And he worked really hard on this and put his soul into it. And I worked hand in hand with him. And we had some arguments and disagreements, because he's very strong-minded, having done 500 successful books. A lot of the look of the book, not a lot, almost all of the look of the book is from Jerry. And it also helps. He's a portrait painter, and he knows horses. He likes to paint horses. So he had to pick out the kind of paper you want to use in a book where you have the copy and the paper. And I wanted it to be legible to read the copy, plus you want it to be able so the artwork kind of pops. So I worked very closely with the artists. And then the poor publisher, Wayne Dementi, he had to work with me, with the artist, Sam Robinson, and with the designer of the book designer, who's also an artist. So we all had our angles. And Wayne Dementi of Dementi Milestone did a fantastic job of sort of staying out of the ring, being the referee, and making sure we just kept going forward. And we put it together in a record time, because I wanted it to be ready in the late spring. We wanted it to be ready for Saratoga. and we had to push it pretty hard for a couple of months.
And that's a great point that you make right there too. That timing of releasing of a book, particularly is around a big event or a big racetrack opening or something like that. Timing of the release of a book is very important on a publicity side of things. So that's why you were pushing for that. Is that right?
Exactly. Some of it was for emotional reasons, and I guess you could say sentimental, but also it was just an intuitive feeling that I wanted to launch it right then at Saratoga, right after my father's race. And it was the most glorious time because my best friends, some of them have nothing to do with horses, all came up. Some of them had never even been to Saratoga. And I sort of had, I had the whole team there. And then I've neglected to say that most of the book is about Tom Voss and my relationship with him. And he had been put in the Hall of Fame just a year earlier. So when I got there in the Hall of Fame, it's where my father is, my uncle is there, Tom was there. It was a good time to do it. Also as far as discussing marketing, when you're at Saratoga, then you have a chance of being in the national press because the national press is there covering the racing.
It just makes so much sense. Like you just really thought through how and when you wanted to publish this book. And then with the cover design and working with your chosen designer for the entire book, how did you approach your publisher and say, I'm going to take the reins on this? Or did you just have that kind of relationship, or like, how did you manage that conversation?
Well, luckily I worked at Gilman School as a director of publications. And I was very used to working with designers and with magazines and actually newspaper people, but putting out the publications and working with my own designer. And I got to, I wasn't shy about telling the designers, no, this isn't what we want. So I was kind of used to doing that. And I'm not sure if Wayne was used to having a writer like me.
Right.
But he actually, once I kind of said I want to do this, I think he kind of liked it. And we used his printer. And as soon as we got it all ready, we went to his printer, and they did a fantastic job. It was very tough to print the illustrations just right. And then he put it all through. Some publishers would probably rather just have it go through their own process. But I think he sort of caught the energy that Sam had, the painter, and that Jerry had, and I had, and we just pushed it really hard.
So you had a conversation that inspired him to let you do that. Plus you had the experience in the background, and you actually came with the resource, the person to design the cover. That's a pretty compelling pitch.
And it was so great to have someone who he knew me and I knew him, and we both trusted each other.
That's so important in creative relationships. It's always important to have that trust, for sure, to bring forth the very best, beautiful representation of the words that you spent. How long does it usually take you to write a book?
When Racing My Father came out, someone asked that at a book signing, and my friend Tom Voss was sitting there at the signing, and someone asked that. He actually was pretending he was me and was signing my books.
Sounds like a good friend.
The signing wasn't going well at first, and he started signing the books, and all these people came over, and they asked him how long it took to write that book, and he said, all my life. But because that book had pieces that I'd written, when I was in college, and all in there. But really, the composition of the book, putting it together, if you had to say an average time, would be about 5 years, because I was working full time. Most of the time, I was finishing one book and sending that out to publishers and getting it rejected over and over, and changing it, getting it rejected and changing it, working on it, trying to get a publisher. At the same time, I was starting another book. So it's sort of a wave.
That's how I believe a lot of writers are. They have their full-time job, and then they have, their passion, which is the writing. So speaking to that, do you have like a writing routine while you were working? Like, did you set up a routine for yourself to help that happen?
I kind of fell into one by necessity. I learned this from the husband of Ann Tyler, the Maryland novelist. And he used to, Tagi Motorasi, he was a doctor, and I interviewed him once. He used to get up every morning right before he went to the office. It was a natural for me because all my life I'd gotten up around 4:45 in the morning to go to the racetrack and get on the first horse at 5:30 or 6. So when I went into the white collar world, I kind of started doing that, getting up early in the morning. Then when I wrote my first book, Gilman Voices, I really had to push it hard and do that. And I got up at 4:30 every morning, and I'd write for an hour, no matter what, every day, just trying to get that book going and touch on it a little bit each day. And that really helped. So now I'm not, and then when I was teaching, I did that. And now what I like to do, I still like to get up early in the morning. And my preference is if I could just get up, feed the horses, the pups, bring my coffee up to my wife in bed, and then come back out. I'd like to just go right to my writing room, start off without any interruptions. And I sometimes put the cell phone, turn it off, plus put it in my car, and don't have the computer on anything. And that's how I like to compose, especially first drafts.
And did the routine get easier? Did it just become part of who you are as you developed that habit?
Yes. And newspaper work was really good for me when I got out of college, and when I was in college at Hopkins, and all the writers there, and people would labor over their stories, and which I now revise. I revise a lot. But when I worked on those newspapers, and the editor was standing right here at my shoulder, sometimes when I worked for the afternoon paper, the editor was standing here. I was working on a manual typewriter in a double spaced sheets. And as soon as one sheet came out, he took it, put it in the fax machine, sent it to the typist, and they started typing it up and getting ready, putting it in hot type to be printed. And so I got used to deadline pressure. I try to be able to write at any time, any place, and any circumstance if I have to.
Wow. I don't know if I could write with someone over my shoulder like that. I guess you just get used to it, and you adapt, right? We're adaptable. You adapt to that. But well, what a great, training for getting the words on the page. Do you have any advice for an aspiring author of memoir? Like, what would you recommend someone try on if they want to take on writing a memoir?
Of course, I think it'd be interesting for them to read some of the classic memoirs. I loved West with the Night by Burl Markham. And it has horses in it. It has flying in it. It has Africa in it, adventure. She was such a character, such an incredible woman, and very inspiring. And I read quite a few other memoirs, and I ended up teaching the memoir to adults and to students. There's some really good ones out there. But finally, you got to just put the ink to paper. And I think that to start with something small, like you don't think of a book. It's not an essay, really, but think of a story, a nonfiction short story that you want to tell, and write that. Then if you want, then that goes all right. Then you write another one. You might not do it in chronological order. You might write something about that happened to you when you're 10 years old. You might write something that happened when you were 30 years old. And then you start writing these different pieces, and you get a feel for it. But I think the idea is you don't even have to think of writing a chapter, but to write that one story, which could become a chapter, and make it kind of self-sufficient. And then it's great if you can send that out and maybe get it published, get some reassurance.
Oh, that is wonderful advice. Writing a chapter as a complete story in and of itself, and then you can submit it to papers or trying to get it published in magazines, and then that kind of becomes the basis for building your book. That's great advice. That probably comes in your course on memoir, right?
Yeah, I've done that, and actually, then if you get the book going and it gets out there, then it's good to be able to take sections out to try to promote your book and try to get the magazines to publish them. And sometimes they really like it because you can't really charge them for it. and I say, oh, well, here's a free story, cool, because they're promoting your book.
Yeah.
Or even if and so that's something great that can happen too.
Yeah, that is something that is super awesome, to take a chapter and then have that be publicity for your book. And it sounds like there's so many ways that you can work with a memoir.
I have to mention my daughter, Eliza, now, and she is a marketing guru, my marketing czar, and does the social media. In America, that's what we're relying more than ever on social media. And that's how I met you.
Eliza's been very, very professional. I've very much enjoyed working with her and working with you very much. And isn't that funny how it all kind of, it's like a network, right? With social media and doing some outreach to reach not only readers, but also other people that are there to support and help you grow the reach of your books. It's a beautiful thing. And I love it when authors unite and we support each other. And I enjoy meeting and sharing the stories of other authors. Okay, so you've successfully written 3 beautiful memoirs and gone through the process. What do you wish you had known when you started out on the journey of being an author?
When I look back on it like that, and then sometimes I think, well, I should have stayed in newspaper work. I won a few of those awards. I was pretty good at it, and I could. And then I think about teaching. I think, I could have gotten a doctorate. Could have been a professor, because that was a dream for a while. Then I look at horse racing, and I think, my whole family inheritance, and I could have been in that. Where I've been in a lot of different occupations. Advice I might give someone else younger is go ahead and keep your steady job and put some money in the bank. Because I went out on a limb many times. I thought, man, I wrote 2 novels, and this novel's going to be out in a year, and I'm going to be sitting in the catbird seat. And drop everything for a few months, and I'd go back to galloping horses and leave that nice job on the newspaper or a really nice job teaching and sort of taking a chance. I think a good thing for a young writers to know is to go ahead and try to develop a good career that can very well be independent of writing, and where you learn about life and meet all kinds of interesting people, and you can save some money. So then you have the time and the security to write, because basically writing it's very difficult in this day and age. You need time, you need a place, you're not interrupted, a peace of mind, and a secure job can help you have that. But I wouldn't have done it any other way. And Henry Miller said, I have a quote of his in Flying Change. He said, you reach the edge, you reach the brink, and then you have to leap. So I took some big chances, and I'm really glad I did it, and that suits my personality. I think, as a steeplechase jockey, I've seen all kinds of things, and I don't mind risk.
Good advice, but I also love that you wouldn't have done it any other way. I think that is a beautiful way to say it. Patrick, I have so enjoyed having you on the show today, and I feel like we could keep talking for hours. I mean, I'm just so fascinated by you, and I love your author journey. Thank you for sharing what you have today. Can you let listeners know where they can find you and your books?
I can. My marketing czar, Eliza Smithwick, has put up a website that I'm very proud of. So please go to my website, patricksmithwick.com. It has all kinds of photographs, articles. It has information on all 3 books and where you can buy the books. You can buy them right from the website. And then, of course, we're on Amazon. And I've become friendly with Amazon. You can get the books there. We have a Facebook page, Racing Time, the name of the book, Memoir of Love, Loss, and Liberation, a good Facebook page. And Eliza, my marketing czar, has me on Instagram now.
Ooh.
So, and then all around here, within about a 700-mile range, I sometimes hop in my car and drive to tack shops and feed stores and leave my books there. And they actually have been some of the best run places with the best campaigns and the best signings. And then the bookstores are having a tough time, as we know, and I try to support the local bookstores as much as possible. Mm-hmm. And my publisher has the book at bookstores all over the country, especially if they ask for it. I think that covers most of the places. And then you can come right here to my office, and many people do, and get one here too. And I'm in Moncton, Maryland.
Oh, that is so exciting. Well, and I'll be sure to link to all those places in the show notes. I'm not going to put the address to where they can come to your house in Moncton, but if you're in Maryland, maybe we can get people in touch with you. Thank you for the gift of your time. And I would certainly love to have you back on the show to dig maybe a little bit deeper into Memoir. So,
well, Carly, thank you very much. You're doing a wonderful job, and I feel very honored to be on your show.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I hope you enjoy these Q&A sessions with wonderful equine authors who love all things horses and riding, just like me. Visit my website, carlykadecreative.com, where you can read the show notes, and make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you so much for your support. Want a free guide to secrets of horsebook authors? Gallop over to carlykadecreative.com/wisdom to have author advice delivered instantly to your inbox. If you are an author who writes about horses and would like to be spotlighted, please let me know. Visit my contact page at carlykadecreative.com to fill out a request. I'd be happy to have you on the show too. Thank you for tuning in to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. See you next time. I'm your host, Carly Kade. Creative writing makes my spurs jingle.